Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Foundation Scotland webinar, hosted by Highlands and Islands Enterprise. My name's Ailey Todd from the Community Assets team here at High, and shortly I'll be handing over to Tom Black, who's the Community Engagement Manager from Foundation Scotland. After the presentation, there will be time for a live Q&A, and if you just can't wait till then, please put your questions in the question box to your right-hand side. You will also see two handouts which are available on the right as well, which I believe Tom will be referring to during his presentation. Now, to hand over to Tom for his presentation.
Okay, good morning folks. I hope everyone is well. Thank you for hosting a presentation from Foundation Scotland. Thank you to the HIE staff. My name is Tom Black. I'm Community Engagement Manager for the North and East of Scotland, which covers pretty much everything from Fife all the way up to the Orkneys. We have no funds that we manage in Shetland at the moment, so that's the area I cover. This is what I'm going to talk through today. I'm going to say a little bit about who we are at Foundation Scotland. I'm going to kick off with a bit of an exploration into the kinds of things that can be funded through community benefit funds, just some examples, and perhaps some of the folk listening in today would like to share some of their examples at the end of the presentation. I'm going to talk through our approach to designing and delivering community benefit funds. I'm going to go into some detail around governance and various models of delivering community benefit funds with Foundation Scotland. I'm going to talk a little bit about our services, say something around the importance of community plans, and then via the handouts there will be some information on the funds we administer by geographical area across Scotland, and finish up with some conclusions and key messages based on our learning to date in delivering community benefit funds. And then, as Ailey says, there will be time for questions. So, Foundation Scotland is an independent registered charity formed in 1996. We are not part of the Scottish Government, as sometimes folk think. We can therefore fund anything that is charitable. We don't just fund registered charities. We can fund anything that's charitable, and that does, as I'll come on to in a moment, include charitable activity delivered by private businesses. We're part of the Community Foundation movement in the UK. There are 52 community foundations in the UK. Those in England tend to be organised on a county level. We are the only one in Scotland covering the whole of Scotland. We make grants to good causes on behalf of a wide range of clients. They include individuals and family trusts, other funders such as Comic Relief and the Big Lottery Fund, a whole range of corporates, and indeed communities too are increasingly coming to us to ask us to help them deliver funds. We distribute around £5 million every year, mainly in the form of grants, and we also manage around £25 million in charitable endowments on behalf of communities, corporates and others. Just coming on to our community benefit work in a little more detail, here's a range of our clients. As you can see, there's some household names in there. 4 of the big 6 utilities. Innogy is the UK renewables arm of npower, and I'm assuming that many of the listening in today are familiar with at least some of these names. We began getting involved in community benefit funds in 2007. Our first client was SSE, and since then we've worked with over 130 communities across Scotland and a wide range of commercial and indeed nowadays not-for-profit developers. We've supported the setup and ongoing operation of over 40 community funds linked to onshore wind farms and other infrastructure developments. We have been involved in one scheme linked to hydropower development and housing development as well. This represents around 1/3 of such funds in value linked to renewable energy in Scotland, and our communities team is 11 staff located across Scotland. We have staff in Thurso all the way down to Gatehouse of Fleet in Galloway. I thought, as I said, I'd just talk through a few examples of some of the things that we funded from community benefit funds. Securing vital community assets, we funded village shops. This one in Kirkmichael is now run by Strathardyll Trading Community Interest Company, was funded via SSE Drumderg Community Fund when we managed that. On the right is the Burke's Cinema in Aberfeldy, funded in part through SSE Griffin Community Fund, and at the foot is the Crook Inn in Tweedsmuir down in the Borders, funded in part. I think the feasibility work was funded from Inverness Glen Kerry Community Fund, which we still manage. So securing vital assets that the community wants to keep, these are built assets obviously, and really at the heart of community life in many ways. We funded affordable housing. This is the Leaf Valley Trust in Nithsdale, and we've awarded £35,000 from SSE Clyde, Dumfries and Galloway Community Fund in 2013 towards the purchase of a new build 3-bedroom house in Closeburn in Dumfries and Galloway, and the aim really here was to bring in affordable housing and enable local people to stay and live locally. Community benefit funds can be used to, and have been used to, fund a huge range of community activities and life. Play parks, this one at the top is in Watton, funded through the Eon Camster Community Fund. Village halls, at the foot there is improvements to Rose Hall Village Hall, funded by Eon Rose Hall Community Fund in Sutherland, and a huge range of community events, from Christmas events to local galas and fun days. And there's the Laird Gala Week, which was funded again by Eon Rose Hall Community Fund. I've put here a thriving economy. In some cases it's just a case of supporting an economy full stop, maintaining what is there. I probably don't need to tell folk listening in today about how fragile the rural economy often is, and small businesses are more often than not the lifeblood of the local economy. We funded Central Garage in Glenkindie via that's in Aberdeenshire, via the Greencoat, Kildrummy, Lumsden and Towie Community Fund, to replace the pumps which wouldn't have otherwise been economically viable, and match funded a grant from the Scottish Government towards that work. It's the only filling station for miles around. At the foot there is an apprentice working in a local garage, funded in part through the Kyle of Sutherland Apprenticeship Scheme, which in turn was funded from the SSE Akani Community Fund. The grant there is really there, although it's obviously supporting the business, it's really there to support the individual, and that's the charitable nature of that grant there. A huge range of recreational and sporting activities have been funded through community benefit funds. Top left we have Duns Rugby Football Club. The development officer there, part of his salary was funded through the Greencoat Drone Hill Community Fund for outreach work with local schools. Top right we have Shindig Duathlon in Lairg, and at the foot we have Loch Shin Sailing Club again in Lairg. I think those were funded through the Eon Rose Hall Community Fund again. And just finally on the examples, development of community anchor organisations. We were very involved in the development of Kyle of Sutherland Development Trust several years ago, which has gone forward to take on and develop a huge range of activity underpinning community life in the Kyle of Sutherland. A whole range of different activity from energy efficiency work to taking on of the post office when that was set to close. Moving on a bit to what we do and how we do it, I just wanted to say a little about our approach. I think a key thing I wanted to get across this morning is that really there isn't any one way of doing this, and that All communities are different, as I'm sure we all know. There's different capacity there in terms of experience and skills to design and manage community funds. And there may be existing infrastructure, there may be existing arrangements, existing community benefit funds. When a new one comes in, looking at how that is best delivered really depends on looking at the local context and what works locally. We like to take a developmental approach, a long-term view. The opportunity presented by community funds, particularly from renewables, is not like any other opportunity. You know, it's usually a 25-year time span for these funds, so a long-term view needs to be taken in order to get the most out of the fund for the local community. We like to promote and harness community strengths, including local skills and experience, bringing people onto decision-making structures, and tapping into their passion, their skills, their knowledge. And we think the community benefit funds work best when decision-making processes are inclusive, accountable, and community-led. And we do spend a lot of time supporting those processes. Here's a little more about what we do. We do a fair bit of work in the early stage of the setup of any fund in facilitating dialogue and devising strategy with the local community as to how the fund will work. That may involve dialogue and discussions within a community, between different communities, if the area of benefit for the fund is going to cover a number of different communities, and we tend to organise, recommend that the funds are organised on community council boundaries. It's just a useful way to set up and organise funds, generally speaking. We have one fund that's organised on the basis of the area of benefit is, excuse me, a radius from the centre of the wind farm, and that is actually a little bit tricky. It is doable, but it's better to use local administrative boundaries for a number of reasons. We also facilitate dialogue, of course, between communities and the developer who's bringing in the fund, and increasingly the developer may be the community. So there are various bodies within the community, and an outside independent set of eyes and facilitator can be very useful in those circumstances. We support local decision making, as I said, generally through two types of structure, either a community panel that is not an incorporated body, or company boards where the community has set up its own company to distribute community funds. We do a lot of work administering funds, the nitty-gritty. I'll come on to that in more detail shortly, but we can also support others locally to administer funds. We provide charitable endowments, I'll say more on that in a moment too, and we like to promote and share good practice, for example, like through webinars like today. I think it was about a year and a half ago we thought it would be a good idea to try and bring together folk in local communities who are involved in developing and managing community benefit funds and trying to distill down some of the learning, some of the good practice, some of the do's and don'ts that they felt were key to share with other communities and indeed developers. So we facilitated a series of roundtable workshops with input from 15 volunteers involved in community benefit fund dispersal in their own local communities, and that included funds that we were involved in and funds we were not involved in. And we came up with an output, a report that we like to call the Charter. The title is Firm Foundations, but it's really a set of principles that the volunteers came up with that they think are hopefully useful to others in the early stages and right through to operation and management of community benefit funds. So there are things in there such as developers need to give meaningful timescales to communities so that they can have time to respond when negotiating agreements over community benefit funds. But equally, there are responsibilities on communities, so community representatives have a responsibility to act in an open and honest manner, disclose any interest they may have, and be clear who they do and don't represent, consulting their community and feeding back. So I can send on or email around copies of that document if folk are interested in having a look at that. Moving into governance of funds and different models for the operation of funds. If the community or the developer would like to use Foundation Scotland to administer their community benefit fund and the money is coming through our accounts, then our Board of Trustees is ultimately responsible for the money and its good governance in terms of in charitable terms. So we're basically supporting the governance, charitable governance of various funds and doing all the reporting to Oscar and doing assessment on all proposals that is really aimed at ensuring that whatever is funded is indeed charitable for public benefit rather than private gain. Here are 5 of the most common models we've developed in partnership with local communities in order to help manage funds in partnership with those communities. So the first 3 are really where there's a panel being set up rather than a separate community company to manage the fund. A single fund would be where a single community is in receipt of a single fund from a developer. So a pretty simple scenario, not an awful lot of complexity to deal with. An example would be EDF Long Park Wind Farm in the Borders near Stow. The second example is what we've dubbed a single joint fund. That's where there's multiple communities within a single area of benefit who come together to work via community panel. Eon Camster and Caithness covers Wotton, Tannakin District, and Lathorn, Libster and Clythe, Libster and Clythe, and representatives from each of those 3 communities sit on a panel and make decisions and scrutinise proposals from each of those communities, which in itself can be a very healthy thing. It can also be a point of contention. But over the years, we've seen that scenario develop into strong, robust governance model on the whole. And those funds may be proportioned, so it may be that each is kind of ring-fenced a third. For example, under the Camster scenario, each is ring-fenced a third of those funds, or it may be that there's no ring-fencing at all and it's first come, first served, may the best project win. The third model is what we call the FS Community Trust. This is where there's a bit more complexity involved. A single community, for example, in a very windy spot, may be in receipt of multiple funds. Now that can lead to a bit of a difficult scenario for a community where different developers are coming in asking for their own arrangements or preferences to be set up in terms of how the various funds would be managed, and that can lead to obviously a number of small fragmented funds that aren't joined up operating in one area. It can lead to multiple it can lead to volunteers basically, having to volunteer so many nights a week. So we had the Old Luce Community Council come to us with this scenario. They were in receipt of 5 different funds from 4 different developers at that point, which was pre-early closure of the ROCS scheme. They were also facing another 4 funds from another 4 completely different developers, so potentially up to 9 funds from 8 developers coming into their community. And I'm going to talk about this model a bit more in a moment, so I won't spend more time on that. But it's managed through a community panel. We have another scenario which is a devolved fund. Generally for smaller amounts of money, we basically administer a block grant to a local anchor organisation or community council. They provide us with a forward plan which can be flexible to allow for new opportunities over the year, and we sign off on that with them, and they just provide us with an annual report, and all we're really looking to do with that annual report is to check that everything that's funded is charitable. Finally, we're increasingly getting involved, being approached by local communities who set up their own independent trust or community company and really would like some support in terms of providing fund administration and company secretary duties. And we have a number of those scenarios now. I just want to touch briefly on the community panel. Where this model is used, it's not an incorporated body. There is a terms of reference, which is a rulebook for the community panel. And really, there is no need to set up a separate company to manage a community fund if you use a third-party charitable administrator like Foundation Scotland. We provide the governance function, but we're still accountable to local community, and they're still in the driving seat when it comes to decision making. They provide a governance function. We support them with various policies and code of conduct and so on to make sure the panel works well. They provide a role in setting fund strategy, deciding on the priorities or outcomes of the fund, other criteria for the fund and so on, how it's all going to work, how it's going to be dispersed. They provide a role in delivery, promoting the fund, sitting on decision-making panels, and they are the decision makers, and keeping track of rewards. And we also encourage a regular review of the fund where the panel looks at what impacts the fund having and how are we working as a panel. How might things need to change given communities are dynamic and always evolving, and how might we need to improve our practice and our ways of working. It's a little example of one of our panels. This is Ian Campster Community Fund panel at the launch of the fund up in Caithness. I mentioned the Foundation Scotland Community Trust. Just wanted to say a touch more about that. This is where separate funds are pooled under one charitable governance roof, which is Foundation Scotland. The funds are safeguarded for the community, so should the local community body, for example the Community Council, ever go into abeyance, they are ring-fenced for those purposes only and for that community only. The community can see through regular reports all the money available through all the different funds, and that can enable clearer planning for more transformational, larger projects. The trust is set up via an agreement between us and the lead community body, and we're essentially a third-party service provider answering to that community body. The community panel is set up to make decisions on the spend, but there is thankfully just one set of panel meetings and related work. We account for and report on each of the funds flowing through that trust individually, so we essentially manage the complexity behind the scenes. We'll provide a report to every donor on their money and how it's been used. But as far as the applicant and the community are concerned, it's packaged and promoted as one fund, simplifies the applicant experience. They don't need to fill in multiple application or monitoring forms. It's fairly cost effective compared to running multiple funds. There is an economy of scale there. It can be set up quickly, and when new developers come along and offer a community benefit fund, the community can point them to their preferred model rather than a new set of arrangements that the developer may propose. So, I'm aware I'm racing through a fair pace and there's a lot of information to take on. I'm going to say a little bit about our services. We can support fund setup through an agreement with the lead community body. It sets out the different roles of Foundation Scotland and the community body. We spend a lot of time establishing, training and supporting community panels or the boards of community companies or trusts, looking at things like good governance and the appropriate policies and mechanisms for dispersing funds in a way that is accountable for everyone, primarily the local community. We can support community profiling or action plan, and that might be paid for through the fund, or it may be that the community can access a startup grant through CARES, which can be used for planning for the dispersal of monies from renewable energy sources. We've supported a number of communities to do this. We can design a fund strategy with a panel or board informed by that earlier piece of work. We can look at different distribution mechanisms. I'll come on to that in more detail. And we'll then help them develop fund materials and go to launch with the media and website and so on. Most often it is an open grant making programme that communities want and that works best, but there are other options for dispersing community benefit funds. It may be that the community action planning exercise has thrown up a key need or service that's required in the local community, and that there's a local organisation, a single local organisation best placed to deliver that, in which case the panel or community company may just solicit a bid from that organisation. It may be that a competitive tender is run for that because there may be a number of organisations that may be well placed. It might be a case of commissioning a service which is paid for through the fund. We funded bursaries for individuals, whether they're volunteers or apprentices. We've recently begun doing some work on participatory budgeting through various programmes, and we have recently also made our first repayable grant. And we have a sister organisation called Resilient Scotland Limited who can actually administer loans with interest payable, should that be deemed the most appropriate mechanism, for example, for funding private business or social enterprise. In terms of supporting fund administration, these are all the things we can do, can support. There is a need to obviously continue to promote the fund throughout its life. There's a lot of work involved in responding to inquiries from applicants normally. Providing an independent assessment of proposals is something that communities really value. Someone outside of the community. We've done some work for E-Day Partnership in providing independent assessment of some of the proposals that have come into their fund from their community-owned wind turbine. Somebody off the island doing that work can be very helpful. As I say, we support panel in their decision making. We provide those assessment reports and statements of flood balance and so on. We make payments and ensure compliance with any terms and conditions set by the panel or board, monitor impact and report back to the panel or board and the developer, if that's a commercial developer or community developer, on the fund and its impact. As I say, we encourage a regular review of the fund. We also are independently audited every year and report on every fund, ring-fence fund, to OSCAR to ensure charitable compliance. We also provide an endowment service. Quick bit on the endowment service. Minimum investment is £25,000. This is putting money away from the fund for year 26 plus, for example. Interest can be reinvested back into the endowment for capital growth, or can be drawn down to be used via to be distributed, or a combination of both. Before I go any further, I've got to say the words. The value of investments can go up or down, so folks should be aware of that, of course. Foundation Scotland tries to target an average annual return of 4% on these investments, and we report every 6 months on the performance of the endowment to the client. We hold an endowment for the Blackford Community Council. That began in April 2009, and since then the investment has enabled £69,000 plus to be distributed in grants. Our fee over the 7 years has been just under £12,000. The current endowment value, as you can see, has grown considerably to just over £408,000. So that's been a real win for the Blackford community. I want to say something about community plans. I think that they can be really, really beneficial where there's significant amounts of money coming in or due to come into a community. Done well, a community engagement process can help build consensus about the local priorities of the community. The process must be inclusive, ensure it's credible, everyone must have a chance to input. It can be a useful, tangible output that can be used not just to help shape the community benefit fund, but local organisations and community groups can also use that to inform their bids to other funds, be it the lottery, Scottish Government, Leader, so on and so forth. We found the community action planning process itself can actually encourage further community action, and in some cases the development of new groups focusing on specific themes or areas for development. And as I said, there's various ways of getting that work paid for. We've supported communities with commissioning and managing various consultants. We don't make recommendations, but we do have a number of consultants we've worked with in the past. And we've got a range of templates that we've now shared with Local Energy Scotland very recently, and I believe they will be made available via the CARES website soon enough. Okay, now for a little bit on the funds we manage. I'm not going to talk through these in detail, but there's instructions there on how to access these via the handout section. Ailey, is that best left to later on?
I'd suggest that we can wait for the questions till the end, yes.
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of handouts there. There's a summary of the services that Foundation Scotland provides, and there's a summary of all the funds that we currently manage that are live or currently administer that are live by geographical area. So I won't go into those because I know we're running out of time. 4 minutes to go. Okay. Just concluding now, just with a bit of kind of our learning and the principles we try to work to and that we think make for good practice in community benefit funds. I think community benefit funds provide a unique opportunity for communities to be in control of their own, sometimes significant resource. And what we've done here is contrast and compare conventional funds, think European funds, think central government funds, versus how community funds might look or feel. So they can be designed to meet the community's own priorities rather than those set by someone or an organisation more distant. Decision making happens locally and is informed by local knowledge. Processes can be designed to best fit with the local community, and timescales can fit with the local community. Impact must be for real. We're often told by folk who sit on our community panels that that project hasn't happened yet, or oh, they've done something different, or oh, they haven't put a plaque up advertising promoting the fact they've been supported by the fund, or it's been a fantastic success, we have to fund them again. It's seen and felt by those who've been involved in making the decisions, and it's reported back directly. Now, I'm not saying all conventional funds feel like they do on the left-hand side of that column, but in the worst case scenario, they might do. So it's really just about the opportunity for communities to be more in control of how this money works for them. As I mentioned at the start, we like to promote good practice in the management of community funds, and for us that we've seen time and time again that community benefit funds work best when they're approached in an accountable way and they're run in an inclusive way. And really, everybody wants accountability, particularly the local community. So at their worst, where there's little accountability, it can feel like there are individual gatekeepers who are not enabling wider access to the fund. Conversely, you can have broad local involvement in fund design, for example, through the community action planning process, and spend through involvement in the panel and rotation of panel members to ensure that there are continuing opportunities and it's not a closed shop in terms of decision making. Again, planning well can ensure, and involving the community in that process can ensure that strategic and long-term aspirations are met through the fund. Where funds are restricted in terms of their area of benefit or the way they work, it can be very territorial, but there is, on the other hand, an opportunity for these funds to really connect communities and groups within each community. These funds need to evolve with local needs, need to develop as community capacity, experience, need and opportunity change. They can unlock ambition, create new partnerships and lever in other funds from elsewhere, and they need to bring tangible impact rather than raising suspicion and distrust, and that's really about being open and accountable. They can bring about social justice to an extent, and ideally they will free up local volunteers to focus on impact rather than encouraging more volunteer burnout. So these are ideal. That's an ideal scenario on the right hand, and that's on the left hand, that's the funds at their worst, that's the risks. Finally, for me, I think just some key messages from the presentation, from our work and our learning to date. There's a significant opportunity here because you're talking about unrestricted money. There's a lot less restrictions around what can and can't be done with the money. There are no rules or few rules. That's a good thing and can be a bad thing. Accountability is important for everyone. Try to plan for impact, try to get consensus as far as possible on local priorities. We can provide a governance function if need be, if that's required. The money will always be safeguarded for the community when it comes through Foundation Scotland. We believe communities should be in the driving seat, making decisions. We support that. There are various models of delivering community benefit funds to suit the local context. A developmental approach is essential. Funds must evolve with local capacity and opportunity. Where there's a plethora of funds coming to the community, they can be pooled and managed effectively. And importantly, get creative. There's an exciting opportunity to deliver new projects, new services in the community. And that's all from me for now. Back over to you, Ailey, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. That was a really thorough presentation. Now we'll move on to the Q&A section of our little webinar today. We've got a couple of questions in our question box already, and those who are attending, if you'd like to keep asking questions of Tom, you've got his eyes in the air here. The first question we've got is actually referring to one of your specific examples quite early on, Tom, and it's talking about the central garage in Glenkindie.
Yes.
And one of our attendees was really interested to know whether that was privately owned or was it a community venture.
No, it was privately owned.
Okay.
We went to our lawyers and asked for a legal opinion on whether and how we can fund private enterprise, and we got a very clear response that it is possible to fund private enterprise where the activity is charitable, and there's a number of specific assessment questions that must be asked, things like public benefit must outweigh private gain, the organisation must not be able to fund it itself, so you would look at their accounts and their profitability, and it has to be it has to meet a charitable purpose. I think that one was funded under the rural regeneration charitable purpose. Other common purposes are things like the promotion of education, where employee training is supported and things like that. So that was funded. That was a private business.
Great, thank you very much. The next question is from Claire Monroe, which is, how much does Foundation Scotland charge for these services? Is there a portion of profits or is it a set rate?
We tend to charge, our charges will vary depending on the local circumstances, so it will depend on the size of the fund, of course. There's an economy of scale. There are certain things you always have to have in place for managing a fund. So really it will depend. There's a sliding scale. The larger the fund, the lower. It's a proportion of the fund, by the way, and it can be. It completely and utterly varies. For smaller funds, it may be 10 to 12% of the value of that fund. For larger funds, it's as small as 5 or 6%. That's for the administration of the fund. Fund setup might be a different one-off cost, but we're happy to talk, and we're happy to speak to communities and developers about the charges, see what works best and whether it's workable for both.
Okie doke. We've got a couple of questions in about geography. The first one from Nick Duffel, which is, are there any funds available for communities in Skye and Wester Ross, or are there any coming up soon?
Skye and Wester Ross, none that we're involved in, I'm afraid. And I know that the CVS on Skye, or Third Sector Interface I should say, has been involved in administering some community funds up that way, including from Vatten Falls, Edinbane Wind Farm. We had a brief initial involvement in that one, but I think it's still managed by the Third Sector Interface up there. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be much use to you there. Apologies, but do get in touch with the CVS.
Similar question in from Jen Ellis on the Western Isles. She's saying that the list of eligible communities in the handout, which is downloaded, good for you, Jen, doesn't include the Western Isles. Are they eligible for any community funds that are currently administered by Foundation Scotland? And again, are there any coming up?
Sorry, nobody in the Western Isles has approached us and asked us to manage or get involved in administering any funds up that way. We're open to approaches, but we're not currently involved in any of the funds up that way. There was at one point, I think we held briefly for some time, we held a pot of money from the Western Isles Development Trust. I can't quite remember, apologies, but we're not involved in distribution at the moment from any funds in the Western Isles. I know there's a lot of developments up there, a lot of community-led developments. We're very happy to come out and talk to groups about how we can help support fund disbursement.
Okie doke. We've got a question in from Nick Duffel, which is, do you target industry sectors for community funding? In particular, communities who are affected by tourism where there is no direct mechanism to solve the issues that tourism causes. These are often outside the remit of local authorities and are left to the communities to solve. If you'd like me to repeat any of that, let me know.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand the question a little more. Do you mean...
I think it's, do you target industry sectors, in particular tourism?
Target in terms of providing grants to those industry sectors?
I think so, yes.
I think that's the question. If it really depends on what local priorities the community have put forward. So if there's a community action planning exercise that's taking place and that's highlighted that mitigating negative impacts on tourism or of tourism is a priority for that community, then yes, that will be a theme in the fund strategy. Ideally, that will filter through into the fund strategy, and projects seeking to tackle that will be welcomed and will ideally be funded if they're well planned out and clearly going to meet that need. We at Foundation Scotland don't decide where the money goes. It's decided by the panel, and it will need to fit with fund strategy. Individual proposals will be looked at, scrutinised in detail by the panel. We will simply assess the evidence of need that's been put forward by the community organisation that's proposing the project, and we'll summarise that and feed it to the panel. They will often complement that with local knowledge as to what they know needs done. So that is absolutely doable, but it really depends on what the local community are saying and how the fund's being prioritised.
Okie doke. We've had an update from the question asker on that one, which has mentioned funding from those industry sectors. So is there any target industry sectors that you kind of target to get funding from?
Okay, sorry, right, so I misinterpreted the question.
So did I, don't worry.
we don't currently work with the tourist industry, but we would. I mean, the majority of our portfolio is from renewable energy. That's been where the opportunity has been primarily over the last kind of 10 years or so, or one of the big opportunities. But we do manage funds that come from the developer of a housing, hotel and golf complex. So we can, community funds, it essentially, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really matter where the money is coming from. Some may argue against that if it's coming from fracking, for example. But regardless of where, let's say, regardless of where the money is coming from, we can get involved in helping and working with the community to shape that money and help them decide how it's spent, how it's managed. So yes, we'd be absolutely open to money coming from the tourism industry and helping communities make best use of that.
Okay, Nick has thanked you for that answer. I think that was bang on.
Thank you.
We've got Joe Smee actually who's attending from the local Energy Scotland, and he mentioned about the geographical questions. He isn't aware of any off the top of his head, but there's also a register on the local Energy Scotland website, so that might be of help to people. When I send around my email update after the webinar with kind of links to listen back, I'll include that link for people. We've got a new question from Jane McIntosh, who's asking if you've ever encountered any issues with local displacement of the private sector, and have you any good examples of business and communities working together?
Great. Okay. Yeah, I think business displacement is a common concern where not just for private funding of private sector business, but also community enterprise and social enterprise. And we do, as part of our assessment, look at displacement as an issue, and the panel will also look at that as well, so as not to threaten existing providers. So, for example, with the Glenkindie garage, I mean, it's the only garage, the only filling station for miles around. So we do look at that. Examples of, the second part of the question was examples of community and business working closely together. Yeah. I think the Kyle Sutherland apprenticeship scheme is a good example of that. So there we assisted the community to set up a scheme that was funded from two separate wind farm funds, and essentially local people, generally speaking young people who want to move into certain industries, whether it's being a plumber, an electrician, working at the garage, etc. I think there was one involved in fisheries management, funding them to gain qualifications to go and work in those areas, in those local businesses. I think Kyle Sutherland Development Trust also does quite a bit of work in partnership with local communities. So there's a couple of examples off the top of my head. I could probably come up with more given the time. Apologies.
Okie doke. That's us coming to the end of the questions in my box. If there's anyone else who has any questions, please fire them in. We'll give you a few seconds to do so. Okie doke. There's nothing flashing up on my screen, so all that's left to do is actually thank you, Tom, for your time and all your expertise, and also to thank those who attended. Again, I'll encourage you to download the handouts, which are on your right-hand side, which Tom talked about quite a lot, and also visit the Foundation Scotland website if you'd like. When you sign off, you're asked for feedback. Please do give us feedback. We always welcome it. And also, if you've got any suggestions for future webinars, please get in contact. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.